I grew up in the 60s where the threat of nuclear war seemed to be an ever-present danger. I remember watching adverts on the television telling you how you could shelter under the kitchen table if a nuclear bomb had been dropped a few hundred yards away down your street, and how everything would be okay if you took the right precautions. Fortunately, those kind of threats and dangers disappeared over the 70s and the 80s, and certainly the 90s and the last few decades. But they seem to have returned again with quite a vengeance and with maybe much more reality with the Ukraine war, which is threatening us all, not just Ukraine. The difficulty that we've had recently seems to have been exacerbated because, well, a pipeline has been sabotaged, and even more recently, a bridge has been blown up. These are two assets which Putin has strong interest in maintaining. After all, it's through this pipeline that he gains a lot of money by selling gas to the West, and the bridge is apparently an absolutely vital connection for him to deliver his resources and troops and whatever to the Crimea. Newspapers are suggesting that Putin blew them up himself, something I find remarkably unlikely. And I think the main character that might be more involved in this would be some 3,000 or 4,000 miles away across the Atlantic. They have much more to gain from damaging these things. And of course, Biden himself has actually said that if Russia were to step into Ukraine, then they would put an end to Nord Stream 2. They would close it down. And when he was asked what that meant, he said, "We will just make sure it stops working. It will definitely close." Well, that's now happened, and consequences are quite huge. If it is the case that America is really waging war with Russia as a kind of proxy Ukraine situation where people are just using that country as the place where the two big supergiants attack each other, then the future doesn't look at all that good. Putin has backed into a corner, one which he can't easily get out of, and that's always a very dangerous place to be when you confront some kind of grizzly bear and they can't escape. That's when the most dangers exist. And it seems to me that his threats of nuclear weapons need to be taken seriously. At least Biden takes them seriously, because Biden has said that he means what he says. And that, of course, just ups the ante even further. What worries me about all of this is that there are some people thinking that, well, maybe you can drop a tactical nuclear weapon. Tactical meaning that it only damages people in the frame of 1,000 yards or 10,000 yards or something, of course. Of course, such things are highly speculative, and no one's ever done that before. In fact, I think the danger is much more real than that. And the reason why I think it's much more real than that is because the whole point of nuclear weapons is that they are a deterrent. They're to stop people from using them. They're to stop people from even thinking about using them. They're there to prevent war, prevent their use. They're the only things which exist that cannot ever be used. The trouble is, if one person decides to use one of them now, even in a limited area, that just takes that game away. The game of deterrence now disappears, and we enter an entirely different game. It's no longer about deterrence, it's about actual usage. And once one side deploys even a small tactical nuclear bomb, it seems to me what they're saying is that we're prepared to use nuclear weapons at any time, at any place, because we've now breached that unbreachable barrier. We've crossed over the line. And I think as soon as that happens, I think, and I might be completely wrong in this, I think the likelihood is that no longer are we in a game of deterrence, we're in a game of you need to destroy your enemy completely, because they're willing to use nuclear weapons, and if they're willing to use them in a battlefield, they're just as likely to use them on a city somewhere outside the battlefield. They're just as likely to use them in intercontinental missiles and send them to America or anywhere else they like. If they'll use them in one place, they'll use them somewhere else. And if that's the case, then you have to get in first. The game switches to destroy your enemy before they destroy you. So I don't hold out a great deal of hope about these kind of tactical usage of weapons. I think once you set one off, I think that unleashes the whole nature of Armageddon. I think it's a bit like that description by Hemingway, I think in his book The Sun Also Rises, where a guy was asked, how did you go bankrupt? And he was told, well, I went bankrupt in two ways. First, very slowly, and then very quickly. And I think nuclear war is a bit like that. It goes very slowly, and then suddenly it goes very quickly. I'm reminded of one last statement by Albert Einstein, who was in some way responsible for starting the nuclear development program off way back in 1945-44. And he said, I really don't know what kind of weapons will be used in World War III, but in World War IV, the weapons will be bows and arrows.